To our amazing viewers at Cheating Tales Lab, we'd love to hear, which part of the world are you joining us from? Let us know. Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. Normal Life. Brian Small had learned patience during his 8 years as an Army Ranger. That same patience had served him well in his civilian life as a contractor, building custom homes across Northern Virginia. At 34, he'd built a good life, a successful business, a beautiful home in Fairfax, and a marriage that had lasted 6 years. His wife, Cassie Small, worked as a pharmaceutical sales representative, a job that took her across the Mid-Atlantic region several times a month. Brian didn't mind the travel. He'd been the one gone for years during his service, missing anniversaries and birthdays. Now it was his turn to hold down the fort. On a humid Tuesday morning in September, Brian stood in his driveway, watching Cassie load her Mercedes with sample cases. She wore her standard uniform, tailored gray suit, hair pulled back in a tight ponytail, expensive heels that clicked against the concrete. "Conference in Philadelphia," she said, kissing his cheek. 3 days, maybe 4 if the meetings run long. "Don't burn the house down." "I'll try my best," Brian replied with a grin. "You have the number for Russ, right? The plumber's coming today to check that leak in the basement." Cassie paused, her hand on the car door. For just a moment, something flickered across her face. Concern? Fear? But it vanished so quickly Brian thought he'd imagined it. "Right. The leak. Just make sure he doesn't overcharge you. You know how contractors are." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Love you." Brian watched her drive away, that moment of hesitation nagging at him. In his years of combat and close-quarters operations, he'd learned to trust his instincts. Something felt off, but he couldn't place what. He pushed the thought aside and headed to his home office. His company, Small Construction, had 3 projects running simultaneously, and he needed to review the afternoon's supply deliveries. His phone rang at 10:47 a.m. "Mr. Small? This is Russ Sexton. I'm downstairs looking at your water heater, and we've got a situation." Brian closed his laptop. "How bad?" "Not the heater. Can you come down here? I need to show you something." The basement of their colonial-style home was partially finished. Brian had done the work himself when they'd moved in 4 years ago. The water heater sat in a utility corner, surrounded by exposed stone foundation walls. Russ stood near the heater, his face pale, work light in hand. "Mr. Small, I had to move the heater to check the connections," Russ said, his voice unsteady. "There's a door back here, behind the heater." Brian moved closer. Sure enough, set into the foundation wall was a door, old wood, painted to match the stone, barely visible unless you were looking for it. A heavy padlock secured it, modern and out of place against the aged wood. "We don't have a door there," Brian said slowly. Russ shifted his weight. "I've worked on a lot of old houses. Sometimes there are root cellars, old storage spaces. But this lock, it's new, maybe 6 months old. And Mr. Small." He pointed his light at the bottom of the door. "There's weather stripping. Recent installation. Someone's been maintaining this." Brian's mind raced. They'd bought the house from an estate sale 4 years ago. An elderly woman had died, and her children had sold the property quickly. He'd renovated most of the basement himself, but this corner had always housed the water heater. He'd never moved it before. "Have you opened it?" Brian asked. "Hell no. That's your property. I just fix pipes." Russ paused. "But Mr. Small, I've got a bad feeling about this. Real bad." Brian knelt by the door, examining the lock. Military-grade padlock, keyhole on top. He tested the door. Solid, recently reinforced. The weather stripping was industrial quality, the kind used for soundproofing. His ranger instincts kicked in. This wasn't a historical oddity. Someone had prepared this space, maintained it, used it. And if Cassie had known about it, that moment of hesitation this morning suddenly made terrible sense. "Russ, I need you to do me a favor," Brian said, standing. "Go upstairs, get me the bolt cutters from my garage. Far wall, red toolbox. And then I need you to stick around. As a witness." "A witness to what?" "I don't know yet. But I want someone else here when I open this door." While Russ retrieved the tools, Brian called his closest friend, Curtis George. They'd served together in Afghanistan, and Curtis now worked as a private investigator in D.C. "Curtis, it's Brian. I need you to come to my house. Now. And bring your camera." "What's going on?" "I think I'm about to find something bad. Real bad. I need documentation, and I need someone I trust." "On my way. 20 minutes." Brian stood in his basement, staring at that door, his mind working through possibilities. Cassie's odd behavior, her frequent trips, the way she discouraged him from ever doing work in this corner of the basement. Whatever was behind that door, his life was about to change. Chapter 2. The Discovery. Curtis George arrived in 18 minutes, carrying a professional camera and a grim expression. He'd seen the look on Brian's face before, in Kandahar, in Helmand Province, right before they breached compounds that intelligence said housed high-value targets. "Show me," Curtis said simply. The three men stood in the basement: Brian, Curtis, and a visibly nervous Russ Sexton. Brian had the bolt cutters in hand, but he paused. "Curtis, start recording. Russ, state your name, the date, and why you're here." The plumber cleared his throat. Russ Sexton, September 26, 2023. I was hired to fix a leak in the water heater. I moved the unit and found this door. Brian approached the lock. "I'm Brian Small, homeowner. I have no knowledge of this door or what's behind it. I'm opening it in the presence of witnesses." He positioned the bolt cutters. "Curtis, make sure you get everything." The lock broke with a sharp crack. Brian removed it, then gripped the door handle. The door opened inward, hinges well-oiled and silent. The smell hit them immediately, antiseptic, chemical, with an underlying odor of something organic and wrong. Curtis stepped forward with the camera, lighting up the space. What they found made Russ vomit. The room was 12 by 12 feet, carved from the earth behind the foundation. The walls were lined with plastic sheeting, the floor covered in industrial tarps. A metal examination table sat in the center, complete with restraints. Shelves lined one wall, holding bottles of chemicals: ketamine, propofol, midazolam, all pharmaceutical grade. But it was the other wall that told the real story. Photographs, dozens of them, pinned to a corkboard. Young women, unconscious, on that same examination table. Dates written in permanent marker on each photo, going back 3 years. Brian's hands clenched into fists. Curtis moved through the room systematically, documenting everything. Russ stood in the doorway, pale and shaking. "Jesus Christ," Curtis muttered. "Brian, there's a laptop here. And files. Physical files." Brian moved like he was in a dream. The laptop was password protected, but the files were open. Names, addresses, physical descriptions, scheduling notes, and photos, before and after shots. The women looked dazed, drugged, violated in ways that made Brian's stomach turn. One file caught his eye: a ledger listing transactions. Names he didn't recognize, amounts that ran into 6 figures. The handwriting was familiar, Cassie's precise, looping script. "There's more," Curtis said quietly. He'd found a second door, hidden behind a false wall. "Brian, you need to see this." The second room was smaller, more recently constructed. Inside were personal items: jewelry, driver's licenses, phones, trophies, and in the corner, a safe. Brian's training kicked in, overriding the horror and rage. "Don't touch anything else." "Curtis, are you getting all of this?" "Every second." "Russ, I need you to go upstairs. Call 911. Tell them we've discovered evidence of multiple crimes, and we need police immediately. Do not tell them what we found, just that it's serious. Can you do that?" Russ nodded, practically running for the stairs. Brian stood in that room, looking at the evidence of his wife's crimes. 3 years. 3 years of business trips, of trusting her, of building a life together. And all the while, she'd been doing this. "I need to see everything," Brian said to Curtis. "Before the police get here, I need to understand exactly what she's done." They worked quickly. The laptop was locked, but the files revealed enough. Cassie wasn't working alone. There were phone records showing repeated calls to a number saved as MJ. The ledger showed payments from that same number, regular deposits into an offshore account. Curtis found a burner phone in a drawer. He powered it on. The last text message, from MJ, had come in yesterday. "Tuesday good. Bringing the new one. Have the room ready." They were planning to use this room tonight, Brian said, his voice cold. While Cassie was supposed to be in Philadelphia. "Which means someone else was coming here," Curtis added. "Someone with a victim." Brian's mind raced. Cassie wasn't in Philadelphia, or if she was planning to come back. And this MJ person was bringing someone here, to this house, to this room. Sirens wailed in the distance. Brian looked at Curtis. "I need your help with something. Anything." The police are going to arrest Cassie. They'll build a case, get convictions. But that takes time. And whoever she's working with, this MJ, they're going to run the moment they hear about this. Evidence disappears, witnesses vanish, and justice gets delayed or denied. Curtis understood immediately. You want to handle this yourself. Not all of it. But I want to make sure every single person involved in this pays. Completely. And I want to do it in a way they can't escape. Brian's eyes were hard. Are you in? Before Curtis could answer, footsteps pounded on the basement stairs. Malcolm Palmer, a detective with Fairfax County Police, appeared, 2 uniformed officers behind him. Brian Small. Palmer asked. We got a call about a crime scene. Brian stepped back, gesturing to the hidden room. Detective, you're going to want to see this. And you're going to want to call for backup. A lot of backup. Chapter 3. The investigation begins. Detective Malcolm Palmer had worked homicide for 15 years. He'd seen crime scenes that haunted him, cases that made him question humanity. But standing in Brian Small's basement, looking at the evidence of systematic predation, he felt a cold fury that surprised him with its intensity. Seal the house, Palmer ordered. I want forensics, I want the FBI field office notified, and I want the medical examiner here. Now, the next 3 hours were chaos. Crime scene techs flooded the basement. The FBI arrived, led by a special agent named Evelyn Newman who specialized in trafficking cases. Brian, Curtis, and Russ were separated and questioned. Brian sat in his own kitchen, giving his statement to Palmer. He told the truth, mostly. The door, the discovery, the contents. He left out only one thing. The burner phone he'd pocketed before the police arrived, now hidden in his garage. Mr. Small, I need to ask you some difficult questions, Palmer said. How well do you know your wife? I thought I knew her completely, Brian replied. Clearly, I was wrong. Her job, pharmaceutical sales. That would give her access to the drugs we found. It would. Did she ever bring work home? Sample cases, medication? Brian thought back. Sometimes. She has a home office upstairs. Locked filing cabinets. Palmer made a note. We'll need to search those. And her phone records, financial statements, everything. This kind of operation requires resources, connections. She didn't do this alone. The files mentioned someone. Initials MJ regular payments. Palmer nodded. We found that. We're running the phone number now. Mr. Small, I need to inform you. Your wife is about to be arrested. We've already issued a bolo. Every law enforcement agency between here and Philadelphia has her vehicle description and plate number. Brian felt nothing. The woman he'd loved, the woman he'd thought he knew, was a monster. What happens to the victims? Agent Newman is working on that. The photos, the files, we'll identify them, contact them. Many of them probably don't remember what happened. The drug combinations we found, they cause amnesia, compliance. These women were violated, and they might not even know it. That made it worse somehow. Palmer leaned forward. Brian, I'm going to be straight with you. You're a witness, but you're also connected to the primary suspect. Your life is about to become very public, very difficult. The media will camp on your lawn. People will question whether you knew. Your business might suffer. I'm telling you this because you seem like a good man caught in a nightmare. I appreciate that, detective. I just want everyone involved held accountable. They will be. I promise you that. After Palmer left, Curtis found Brian in the garage. Brian retrieved the burner phone from his toolbox. You took evidence from a crime scene, Curtis said without judgment. The police will track the number from the ledger. They'll find MJ eventually. But eventually means this person has time to destroy evidence, intimidate victims, disappear. I can't let that happen. Curtis studied his friend. What are you planning? The text said Tuesday good. Bringing the new one. That's tonight. MJ thinks this operation is still running. Thinks Cassie is here, ready to receive a victim. You want to be here when they show up. I want to know who they are, where they operate from, how extensive this network is. Then I'll hand everything to Palmer. Brian paused. But if the opportunity presents itself to make them suffer first, I'm taking it. Curtis nodded slowly. Okay, then we need to plan this carefully. The house is still a crime scene. Forensics will clear out by evening. Palmer said they'd maintain surveillance on the property in case Cassie tries to come back. But I can ask them to set up outside. Tell them I need space to process this. And MJ. Brian pulled up the text thread on the burner phone. I'm going to respond. Tell them to come to the back entrance, the basement door that opens to the yard. That way they avoid the front where police might be watching. You're setting a trap. I'm making sure justice is fast and complete. Brian's expression was cold. I spent years hunting bad people in bad places. I know how to do this, and I know how to make sure it sticks. They spent the afternoon planning. Curtis reached out to his network of ex-military contractors and private investigators. Brian reviewed the files from the basement, memorizing faces, names, details. By the time Cassie was arrested, pulled over on I-95 near Baltimore, they had a strategy. At 8 p.m., Brian sent a text from the burner phone. Ready. Use back entrance. Cops watching front. Be careful. The response came quickly. ETA 90 minutes. She ready? Brian replied, prepped and waiting. Curtis set up in the garage with surveillance equipment. Brian positioned himself in the basement, near the hidden room. He'd convinced Palmer to keep the patrol units on the street, explaining that he needed time alone in his house to process the horror of what he'd discovered. Palmer had reluctantly agreed, but warned Brian not to interfere if Cassie showed up. Brian had no intention of interfering with Cassie. She was in custody, facing federal charges. But MJ was still free, and Brian wanted to look into the eyes of the person who'd turned his home into a nightmare. At 9:47 p.m., Curtis's voice came through Brian's earpiece. Vehicle approaching. Black SUV, no plates. Single occupant visible. Brian's heart rate slowed, his breathing steadied. Ranger training, muscle memory. He heard the basement door open, footsteps on the stairs. A man entered, tall, well-dressed, carrying a designer bag. He looked around the basement, confused by the absence of the water heater, which had been moved by forensics. Cassie, the man called out. Where are? Brian stepped out from the shadow of the stairs. The man spun, his hand moving to his waistband. Don't, Brian said quietly, his voice carrying absolute authority. I'm faster than you, and I really want a reason. The man froze, recognizing something in Brian's posture, his tone. This wasn't a man to challenge. Who are you? The man asked. I'm Brian Small. I live here. And you must be MJ. Brian moved closer. Marshall Jarvis, pharmaceutical executive. Cassie's boss. The man who's been running a trafficking operation out of my basement. Marshall's face went pale. I don't know what you're. The police found everything. The room, the files, the photos. Cassie's in custody. Right now, FBI agents are probably executing a search warrant on your properties. Brian smiled, and it was not a pleasant expression. You walked into a trap. As if on cue, lights flooded the basement. Malcolm Palmer appeared at the top of the stairs, gun drawn. Marshall Jarvis, FBI. You're under arrest for human trafficking, conspiracy, and about 20 other charges I'm going to enjoy listing. Down on the ground, hands behind your head. Marshall's legs gave out. He collapsed, the bag falling from his grip. Curtis appeared, camera rolling, documenting everything. Palmer descended the stairs, cuffing Marshall as agents flooded the house. He looked at Brian. Good work on that text. He walked right in. Brian nodded, but his eyes stayed on Marshall. Who else is involved? How many others? Palmer pulled Marshall to his feet. He'll tell us everything. They always do when they're facing life in federal prison. This operation is over, Brian. You helped end it. But as they led Marshall away, as the FBI cataloged evidence and prepared to dismantle a trafficking network, Brian felt no satisfaction. Justice was happening, yes, but it was too clean, too procedural. These people had used his home, his life, his trust to hurt innocent people. The law would punish them. But Brian wanted something more personal. He would get his chance. Chapter 4, Digging Deeper. 3 days after Marshall Jarvis's arrest, Brian sat in a FBI conference room with Detective Palmer and Agent Newman. The investigation had exploded into something massive. 12 victims identified so far, a network spanning 3 states, and connections to organized crime that went deeper than anyone had anticipated. Marshall is cooperating, Agent Newman explained, sliding photos across the table. In exchange for a reduced sentence, he's giving us everything. Names, locations, financial records. But there's a problem. Brian studied the photos. Men in expensive suits, women at charity galas, business executives, and community leaders. Who are these people? Clients, Palmer said grimly. People who paid Marshall and Cassie for access to drugged, compliant victims. Politicians, businessmen, doctors. People with money and power who thought they were untouchable. Thought. Brian asked. Newman leaned back. That's where it gets complicated. These people have resources, lawyers, connections, the ability to make evidence disappear. We've already had 2 judges recuse themselves from the case due to conflicts of interest. We're finding obstruction at every level. Someone is trying to bury this. Brian felt cold rage building. So they'll get away with it. No, Plumber said firmly. But it's going to take time. Years, maybe. Appeals, motions, delays. Justice will happen, but it won't be fast. That's not good enough. Newman and Plumber exchanged glances. Mr. Small, I understand your frustration, Newman began. But you need to let us handle this through proper channels. If you interfere, I'm not planning to interfere with your investigation, Brian interrupted. But I have resources of my own, and I'm not bound by the same rules you are. Plumber stood. Brian, don't do something stupid. Don't throw away your life because of what Cassie did. I won't. Brian rose as well. But I'm going to make sure everyone who used my home to hurt people faces consequences. All of them. Completely. After the meeting, Brian returned home, a home that no longer felt like his. Crime scene tape still marked the basement entrance. Reporters camped across the street. His business had lost 3 contracts as clients distanced themselves from the scandal. Curtis was waiting in the driveway. I have information you need to see. They went to Curtis's office in D.C., a converted warehouse space that served as headquarters for his investigation firm. Curtis had spent the last 3 days building profiles on everyone connected to Marshall's operation. Marshall named 15 clients, Curtis explained, pulling up files on his computer. But I think there are more. Look at this: financial patterns, travel schedules, phone records I obtained through less than legal means. There's a group of 5 men who are central to this network. They're not just clients. They're investors, organizers. Marshall was middle management. These men are the board of directors. Brian studied the screen. 5 faces, 5 names. Gerard Pearson, real estate developer, major political donor. Todd Cahill, surgeon, ran a private clinic. Felix Hamilton, investment banker. Clifton Schultz, technology CEO. Eugene Gorman, attorney, partner at a major D.C. firm. These men have a combined net worth over $2 billion, Curtis continued. They've known each other since Yale. They sit on boards together, vacation together, invest together. And according to Marshall's records, they've been doing this together for almost a decade. Longer than Marshall was involved, Brian observed. Exactly. Marshall and Cassie were brought in 3 years ago to expand operations, provide pharmaceutical support. But these 5, they started this. They built it. And they have the resources to make it all disappear. Brian felt something shift inside him. The law would try to prosecute these men. But men with this much money and power rarely faced real consequences. They'd pay fines, settle lawsuits. Maybe 1 or 2 would serve minimal time in comfortable federal facilities. That wasn't justice. I need to understand them, Brian said. Everything about them. Their families, their weaknesses, their secrets. Can you do that? Curtis hesitated. Brian, what are you planning? To give them what they deserve. On my terms. Brian turned to face his friend. Curtis, these men used my home, my life, as a hunting ground. They hurt people, destroyed lives, and they think they're going to walk away with their wealth and reputation intact. I can't let that happen. You're talking about revenge. I'm talking about justice. Real justice, not the kind that gets delayed and diminished and buried in paperwork. Curtis studied Brian for a long moment. Then he nodded. I'll get you everything. But Brian, if we do this, and I mean really do this, we need to be smart. These men are dangerous. They have resources, security, connections to people who make problems disappear. So did the Taliban commanders I hunted in Afghanistan, Brian replied. They had money, guns, loyal soldiers. We still got them. This isn't Afghanistan. No, it's not. I know the terrain better here. Brian pulled up the file on Gerard Pearson. Start with him. Real estate developer means properties, lots of them. Places where illegal activities might happen. Find them. Over the next week, Curtis assembled a dossier on each of the 5 men. Gerard Pearson owned 17 properties across Virginia and Maryland, and 3 that weren't listed in public records, shell corporations hiding ownership. Todd Cahill's clinic had been shut down 2 years ago for administrative issues, but he'd immediately opened another under a different name. Felix Hamilton had offshore accounts that received regular transfers from untraceable sources. Clifton Schultz's tech company had contracts with data brokers who sold personal information, including addresses and schedules of young women. Eugene Gorman had represented multiple clients accused of sex crimes, getting charges dropped or reduced. These men weren't just criminals. They were predators who'd built an entire system to enable their predation. Brian spent his days working through the evidence, building a strategy. He'd learned in the Rangers that successful operations required intelligence, planning, and adaptability. You identified the target, understood their patterns, found their vulnerabilities, and struck with overwhelming force. He also made contact with the victims. Agent Newman had started a support group for the 12 women who'd been identified. Brian attended one meeting, sitting in the back, listening to stories of lost time, mysterious bruises, photos they couldn't remember being taken. These women had been violated in ways they couldn't fully comprehend, and now they had to live with the knowledge of what had been done to them. One woman, Lily Merrill, approached Brian after the meeting. "You're the husband, right? The one who found the room." "Yes." Lily was 26, a graduate student who'd attended a pharmaceutical conference where she'd met Cassie. "I don't remember anything after having a drink with your wife. But there are photos. I've seen them. Photos of me on that table, and—" She stopped, tears streaming down her face. "I want them to pay. All of them. And I don't care how it happens." Brian handed her a card with his cell number. "If you remember anything, names, faces, details that might help, call me. Day or night." The FBI says the men involved might not face trial for years. "They'll face consequences sooner than that," Brian promised. "I guarantee it." Chapter 5, Setting the Trap. 2 weeks after the discovery, Brian had a plan. It was risky, possibly illegal, and definitely permanent. But it would work. The key was information. Curtis had hacked into Gerard Pearson's private servers, a federal crime. But Curtis had ways of covering his tracks, and found something explosive, a server containing videos. Hundreds of them. The 5 men had documented their crimes, recorded their victims, created an archive of evidence that would bury them completely. They kept trophies, Curtis explained, disgust evident in his voice. Just like Marshall. Narcissists who think they're invincible. Where's the server physically located? Gerard's estate in Middleburg. Home network, isolated system. They probably thought it was secure. Brian smiled coldly. "Can you get me in? Gerard's having a party this Saturday. Charity fundraiser, 200 guests. Security will be focused on the public areas. If you can get an invitation, you could access his office during the event." "I don't need an invitation. I need a catering uniform and a delivery van." They worked out the details over the next 3 days. Curtis obtained uniforms from a catering company that was servicing the event. Brian would enter as kitchen staff, slip away during service, access Gerard's office, and copy the entire server. 6 hours of work, and they'd have evidence that would destroy all 5 men. But Brian wanted more than evidence. He wanted them to know who had beaten them. Saturday evening, Brian drove a rented catering van to Gerard Pearson's estate. The property was massive, 20 acres in Middleburg's horse country, a mansion that probably cost $10 million. Luxury vehicles filled the circular driveway. Inside, Virginia's elite mingled, drinking wine and pretending to care about whatever charity Gerard was pretending to support. Brian moved through the kitchen, ignored by actual catering staff who were too busy to question another person in uniform. He'd memorized the house layout from blueprints Curtis had obtained. Gerard's office was on the 2nd floor, eastern wing. At 8:30 p.m., during the main course, Brian slipped upstairs. Gerard's office was locked, but Brian had learned lock-picking in the Rangers. 30 seconds, and he was inside. The office was exactly what he'd expected. Expensive furniture, awards and photos documenting Gerard's supposed philanthropy, and a hidden server room behind a bookshelf. Curtis had provided the bypass codes. Brian connected a portable drive and began copying data. That's when the door opened. Gerard Pearson stood in the doorway, confused at first, then alarmed. "Who the hell are you?" "Security." Brian moved fast. He was across the room before Gerard could react. One hand over the man's mouth, the other gripping his shoulder in a pressure hold that sent Gerard to his knees. "Don't," Brian said quietly. "Don't scream. Don't fight. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." Gerard's eyes were wide with terror and recognition. He'd seen Brian's face in the news. "You know who I am," Brian continued. You know what I found in my basement. And you know that you're one of the men who used it. He released the pressure slightly. I'm going to remove my hand. If you scream, I'll make you regret it. Not if you understand. Gerard nodded. Brian released him, closing the office door and locking it. You can't be here, Gerard gasped. You're tampering with evidence, breaking and entering. I'm taking what I need to destroy you, Brian interrupted. All of you. Every single man involved in Marshall's operation. Because the law is too slow, and men like you always find ways to escape. He gestured to the server. I know what's on there. Videos, records, proof of everything you've done. I'm taking it all. You'll go to prison. Maybe, but you'll be in hell. Brian checked the data transfer, 70% complete. I'm going to make sure every victim knows your face. Every business partner sees what you really are. Every member of your country club watches the videos of what you did to those women. You'll lose everything, money, reputation, family. And then I'll make sure the most violent prisoners in whatever federal facility you end up in know exactly what you did. Gerard's face had gone pale. Please. I have a family. Children. So do your victims. Did you think about their families while you were raping them? The transfer completed. Brian disconnected the drive, pocketing it. He looked at Gerard with contempt. Here's what's going to happen. I'm walking out of here. You're going to stay in this office for 10 minutes. If you follow me or call security before then, I'll upload every file on this drive to the internet. Every news organization, every social media platform, every forum and website I can find. Do you understand? Gerard nodded. Broken. Good. And Gerard. Brian leaned close. Tell your 4 friends that I'm coming for them too. Tell them Brian Small knows everything, has everything, and won't stop until they've all paid completely. Tell them to enjoy their freedom while it lasts. Because justice is coming, and it won't be delayed by lawyers or money or connections. It's coming, and it's final. Brian left through the kitchen, discarded the uniform in the van, and drove away. Behind him, Gerard Pearson sat in his office, his world crumbling around him. Chapter 6. The Dominoes Fall. The next morning, Brian uploaded portions of the server contents to a secure cloud storage, then invited Detective Plumber and Agent Newman to his house. I have evidence, Brian said simply. Everything you need to prosecute Gerard Pearson, Todd Cahill, Felix Hamilton, Clifton Schultz, and Eugene Gorman. Videos, financial records, communications. All of it. Palmer's face darkened. How did you obtain this evidence? Does it matter? It matters for court. If this was obtained illegally, then use it to get warrants for legal searches, Brian interrupted. You'll find the originals. I'm just saving you time. Newman took the hard drive, examining it. This is TB of data. If even half of it is authentic, it's all authentic. Watch it yourself. You'll see faces, dates, locations. Everything you need. Palmer stood. Brian, you broke the law. I can't ignore that. Then arrest me. But first, take down those 5 men. Because if the law doesn't, I will. And my methods won't leave them in a condition to stand trial. Palmer and Newman left with the evidence. Brian knew he'd crossed a line, but he'd crossed many lines in his life, in service to his country, in protection of innocence. This was no different. Over the next week, the investigation exploded. Federal agents raided properties belonging to all 5 men. Gerard, Todd, Felix, Clifton, and Eugene were arrested simultaneously, denied bail, and held pending trial. The media coverage was relentless. Wealthy predators, powerful men brought down, justice for victims. But Brian wasn't satisfied. These men were in custody, yes, but they had lawyers, they had strategies, they had hope. He wanted to take that hope away. Curtis helped him design the next phase. Using the victim's testimony and the video evidence, they created a comprehensive website documenting every crime, every victim, every detail. Then they sent it to every media organization, every advocacy group, every social media influencer they could find. The site went viral within hours. Millions of people watched the evidence, read the stories, saw the faces of the predators. Gerard's business partners terminated contracts. Todd lost his medical license. Felix's investment firm collapsed. Clifton's tech company stock plummeted. Eugene was disbarred. Within 2 weeks, all 5 men had lost everything except their freedom, and that wouldn't last much longer. But there was one more piece Brian needed. He visited Cassie in federal detention. She looked broken, orange jumpsuit, hair pulled back, no makeup. When she saw Brian, something flickered in her eyes. Regret? Fear? Why did you do it? Brian asked. Cassie was silent for a long moment. Money. Marshall offered me $250,000 a year. I thought if no one remembered, if the drugs made them forget, then it wasn't really hurting anyone. You're lying to yourself. I know. Cassie's voice cracked. I know what I did. I know what we did. And I know you'll never forgive me. I won't. But I need you to testify against all of them. Gerard, Todd, Felix, Clifton, Eugene. Give the prosecutors everything. Make sure they go down. Why would I help you? Because it's the only thing left you can do. The only way to even begin to make amends. You'll still go to prison for 20 years minimum. But maybe, eventually, you can live with yourself. Cassie stared at him. Then, slowly, she nodded. I'll testify. I'll tell them everything. Brian stood to leave. At the door, he paused. I loved you. I built a life with you. And you turned it into a nightmare. I hope 20 years is enough time to understand what you've destroyed. He didn't look back. Chapter 7. The Trial. 6 months later, the trial began. Federal prosecutors, armed with overwhelming evidence, presented a case that was airtight. Videos, financial records, victim testimony, and Cassie's cooperation painted a picture of systematic predation that shocked even the hardened judge. Brian attended every day, sitting in the gallery, watching as the men who'd used his home tried to mount a defense. Their lawyers argued technicalities, questioned evidence authenticity, attempted to suppress testimony. But the weight of proof was crushing. Gerard Pearson's lawyer tried to argue entrapment, that Brian had somehow manipulated his client. The judge dismissed it immediately. Todd Cahill's defense claimed medical research, that the videos were documentation of pharmaceutical trials. The victims who testified destroyed that lie. Felix Hamilton attempted to hide behind attorney-client privilege and financial privacy laws. Curtis's hacking had already destroyed those protections. Clifton Schultz argued that he was merely a client, not an organizer. The video evidence proved otherwise. Eugene Gorman, the attorney, represented himself. It was a disaster. He tried to discredit witnesses, suppress evidence, and manipulate procedure. The judge held him in contempt twice. Cassie testified for 3 days. She detailed the operation, how Marshall had recruited her, how the 5 men had funded the expansion, how they'd selected victims and transported them to Brian's basement. She described the drugs used, the methods employed, the pleasure these men took in their crimes. When she finished, she looked at Brian one last time. He showed no emotion. She was doing the right thing, but it didn't absolve her. It didn't repair what she'd destroyed. The defense called Marshall Jarvis, hoping his cooperation agreement would undermine his credibility. Instead, Marshall confirmed everything Cassie had said. He detailed payments, schedules, specific incidents. He admitted his guilt and begged the victims for forgiveness he knew he'd never receive. After 6 weeks of testimony, the jury deliberated for 4 hours. Guilty. On all counts. All defendants. The courtroom erupted. Victims wept. Family members of the accused sat in stunned silence. The judge set sentencing for 1 month later, but everyone knew what was coming. Life sentences, no possibility of parole. Brian felt Curtis's hand on his shoulder. It's over. You won. It's not over yet, Brian replied. Chapter 8. Sentencing. The sentencing hearing was scheduled for a cold Monday in March. Brian arrived early, taking his usual seat in the gallery. The courtroom filled with victims, their families, advocates, and media. The judge entered, and the room fell silent. He was an older man, Judge Nathaniel Morrow, known for his strict interpretation of sentencing guidelines and his lack of tolerance for predators. We're here to sentence 5 defendants convicted of human trafficking, conspiracy, rape, and numerous other charges, Judge Morrow began. But before I impose sentences, I'm going to allow victim impact statements. We'll hear from those who were directly harmed by these men's actions. 12 women stood, one by one, and told their stories. Lily Merrill spoke of lost time, of nightmares, of trusting someone who'd betrayed that trust. Others described similar experiences, drugs, manipulation, violation. Some cried. Some spoke with cold fury. All of them looked at the 5 defendants with expressions that demanded justice. When they finished, Judge Morrow addressed the defendants. In my 30 years on the bench, I have never encountered such callous disregard for human dignity. You 5 men had everything, wealth, education, position, and you used those advantages to prey on vulnerable women. You drugged them, violated them, and documented your crimes as trophies. You felt entitled to do this. You felt invincible. You were wrong. Marshall Jarvis and Cassie Small have cooperated with prosecutors. They've shown remorse, however inadequate. Their sentences reflect that cooperation. 25 years for Marshall, 20 for Cassie. But you 5. Judge Morrow's voice hardened. You've shown no remorse. You've fought every step of the way. You've attempted to suppress evidence, intimidate witnesses, and manipulate this process. Therefore, I'm imposing the maximum sentence allowed by law. He proceeded through each defendant. Gerard Pearson, life without parole, plus 60 years consecutive. Todd Cahill, life without parole, plus 40 years consecutive. Felix Hamilton, life without parole, plus 50 years consecutive. Clifton Schultz, life without parole, plus 50 years consecutive. Eugene Gorman, life without parole, plus 70 years consecutive. You'll be transferred to maximum security federal facilities, Judge Morrow continued. You'll spend the rest of your lives in 8x10 cells, with minimal contact with the outside world. Your wealth is being seized under asset forfeiture laws. Every dollar you have will go to victims' compensation. Your names will be forever associated with these crimes. And when you die in prison, you'll be remembered not for your success or philanthropy, but for the monsters you truly were. He banged his gavel. This court is adjourned. Brian watched as the 5 men were led away in chains. Gerard was crying. Todd looked catatonic. Felix, Clifton, and Eugene stared straight ahead, broken. Justice had been served. But Brian knew that the real punishment would come in prison, when these wealthy, privileged men had to survive among the population they'd always looked down on. Curtis had made sure that key inmates in each facility knew exactly what crimes Gerard, Todd, Felix, Clifton, and Eugene had committed. Their lives would be hell, as they should be. Chapter 9, New Beginning. 3 months after sentencing, Brian stood in his driveway, watching moving trucks load up his belongings. He'd sold the house. He couldn't live there anymore, not with the memories of what he'd found. A nonprofit organization working with trafficking victims had purchased it, planning to demolish the building and create a memorial garden. His business had survived. Some clients had left, but others had reached out, offering support and new contracts. People respected what he'd done, finding evil, confronting it, destroying it. In a strange way, the scandal had made him a symbol of resistance against predators. Curtis pulled up in his truck. You ready? Yeah. Brian took one last look at the house. I'm ready. They drove to a small farm Brian had purchased in West Virginia. 40 acres, a renovated farmhouse, privacy. A place to rebuild his life, away from the memories and the media attention. At the farm, Brian found a package on the porch. Inside was a letter from Lily Merrill. Mr. Small, I wanted to thank you, not just for finding that room, but for everything you did after. You could have let the police handle it, let the legal system take its time. Instead, you made sure we got justice quickly, completely. You gave us closure. I'm back in school now. I'm seeing a therapist. I'm healing. Because of you. All 12 of us wanted to contribute to your fresh start. It's not much, but please accept this as a small token of our gratitude. Inside was a check for $50,000, signed by all 12 victims. Brian sat on his porch, holding the letter, feeling emotion he'd kept bottled up for months finally surface. He'd been operating on rage and determination for so long that he'd forgotten what else he was capable of feeling. Curtis joined him, handing him a beer. You did good, brother. You destroyed the bad guys, protected the victims, and kept your soul intact. That's a win. Doesn't feel like winning. Because Cassie betrayed you. Because your home became a crime scene. Because you had to become something harder than you wanted to be. Curtis paused. But you adapted. Just like you did overseas. You found the mission, executed it, and completed it. Those men are in cages. The victims have closure. And you're still standing. Brian nodded slowly. What now? Now you rebuild. Start over. Maybe small construction expands to West Virginia. Maybe you find someone new eventually, someone who isn't a monster. Maybe you just work on this farm and find peace. Peace sounds good. They sat in silence, watching the sun set over the mountains. Brian thought about the journey, from that morning when Cassie left for Philadelphia, to discovering the hidden room, to dismantling an entire trafficking operation, to watching 5 predators receive life sentences. His phone buzzed. A text from Detective Plumber. More victims coming forward. Your evidence opened the floodgates. We're finding operations in 4 other states. Your actions saved lives, Brian. Real talk. Brian replied, just did what needed doing. Plumber, most people wouldn't. You're a good man. Brian set the phone down. He didn't feel particularly good. He felt tired, worn down by months of confronting evil. But he also felt satisfied. The mission was complete. Justice had been served. Not the slow, bureaucratic justice of the legal system, but swift, certain, total justice. The 5 men were in cages. Marshall and Cassie were paying for their crimes. Victims were healing. The network was destroyed. And Brian Small was free. Free from the lies. Free from the woman who'd betrayed him. Free to start over. You know what the best part is? Curtis said suddenly. What? Those 5 rich assholes thought they were untouchable. They thought money and power made them invincible. And then they ran into you, a contractor, a soldier, a man they would have looked down on. And you destroyed them. You took everything they had and burned it down around them. That's poetic justice. Brian smiled, his first real smile in months. I like that perspective. It's the truth. You beat them because you were smarter, tougher, and more determined. They underestimated you, and it cost them everything. As darkness fell, Brian thought about the future. He'd build something here, a business, a home, maybe eventually a new family. He'd help Curtis expand his investigation firm, maybe take on cases involving predators and traffickers. Use his skills, his experience, his determination to protect people who couldn't protect themselves. He'd become something more than a contractor. He'd become a hunter of monsters. And if another monster ever crossed his path, ever threatened innocent people, ever thought they were untouchable, Brian Small would show them exactly how wrong they were. He'd show them what justice looked like when it came from someone who refused to quit, refused to compromise, refused to let evil win. He'd show them hell. But for now, in this moment, sitting on his porch with his best friend, watching the stars appear over the mountains, Brian allowed himself something he hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. The nightmare was over. The monsters were caged. And Brian Small was finally, truly free. Epilogue. 2 years later, Brian Small stood in the office of his expanded construction company, now called Small and George Construction. Curtis had joined as a partner, and together they'd built something successful, not just a business, but a network dedicated to finding and stopping predators. They'd worked on 5 cases since the trial, partnering with law enforcement to identify trafficking operations, gather evidence, and ensure swift justice. Brian's military background and Curtis's investigation skills made them formidable. On his desk was a photo from the Memorial Garden dedication, 12 women, survivors, standing together in the place where they'd been violated, now transformed into something beautiful. A place of healing, of remembrance, of hope. Brian's phone rang. Detective Plumber. Brian, we've got a situation. Another operation, another network. And we need someone who knows how to handle this kind of thing. Plumber paused. Someone who gets results. Are you interested? Brian looked at the photo of the survivors, then at Curtis, who nodded. Tell me everything, Brian said. The hunt was on again. And somewhere, monsters who thought they were safe began to feel the first cold touch of fear. Fear that Brian Small was coming for them. Fear that justice, when it came, would be absolute. Fear that was entirely justified. This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy this story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.